They've decided to give the lake house to Aria, my mother said, raising her glass as if it were a royal announcement. Her voice cut through the room like the crack of a snapped branch. It was Saturday afternoon, 2:15 p.m. late summer. The ceiling fan hummed lazily, spreading the scent of lemon cake and lake water through the living room. Everyone was gathered, siblings, in-laws, neighbors who had dropped by coincidentally. My sister Aria stood near the fireplace, her face glowing, a silk scarf draped around her shoulders like she'd just been crowned queen of the shoreline. When they gave away the lake house, I didn't argue. I just watched and started planning. Stay with me, this story is one you won't forget. I didn't flinch. Not even a blink. I pressed my thumb against the cool glass of my iced tea, steadying my heartbeat. If they expected tears, they were going to be disappointed. The lake house had been our family's anchor since before I could spell my own name. Summer spent patching the roof with Dad, autumn mornings fishing off the dock, winter weekends bundled around the fireplace. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was history woven with calloused hands and sunburned shoulders. And now, in one neat sentence, my mother handed it to Aria like a prize at a raffle. She's always dreamed of it, Mom continued, smiling at her like she was bestowing a kingdom. Dreamed of it? Aria hadn't set foot here for years. She was too busy living her big city life, showing up only for photo ops at Christmas. I was the one who helped Dad replace the dock plank by plank during the summer he injured his back. I was the one who sat beside him learning how to reseal the wood, how to fix the leaks. But none of that mattered now. I sipped my tea slowly, the ice clinking against the rim like quiet applause. Isn't it perfect? Aria beamed at me. I already have plans for the place. I might paint the dock white, maybe host a little weekend retreat. Oh, and the upstairs loft will make the cutest yoga studio. She laughed, tossing her hair back. The sound grated against my ears like a chair dragged across tile. Inside, something twisted, not shock, not even heartbreak. It was quieter than that. A slow, deliberate tightening like pulling the drawstring of a velvet pouch. I glanced around. My brother-in-law nodded approvingly. My aunt whispered to someone, "She'll make it beautiful." No one met my eyes. Not one person. That's when I noticed something odd. Dad's old renovation folder sat on the side table, half hidden under a stack of magazines. The edges were frayed, a faint ring of coffee on the cover. My pulse gave a single sharp beat. That folder held every permit, every expense, every photo of the dock's reconstruction. I had made copies of those years ago. They didn't know that. "Come on," Mom said, clapping her hands. "Let's take a family picture out by the dock. It's Aria's now, after all." The sentence floated through the air like a bad smell. Everyone began moving toward the back door. The sound of shoes against hardwood echoed down the hall. I followed slowly, letting the chatter fade just enough to hear the crunch of the screen door as it creaked open. The lake stretched out like a sheet of glass, catching the golden afternoon light. The dock extended into the water, each plank familiar under my sandals. I could still remember the day we finished it. Dad handed me a hammer and said, "Your hands built this too." I walked a few steps behind the group, observing. Aria ran ahead, posing dramatically at the edge of the dock. She threw her arms wide as if embracing her new kingdom. Her husband pulled out his phone to snap a few pictures, angling for the best shot. "She looks like she was born here," someone whispered behind me. "Oh, he didn't." I was. A neighbor approached me quietly, Mrs. Jenkins, who lived 2 doors down. She leaned in and whispered, "I thought this place was yours, dear." I forced a small smile. So did I. Her eyebrows knitted together, but she didn't say more. She knew better than to meddle in family affairs. Still, that one line was enough to warm me from the inside, like a tiny spark catching in dry grass. "Stand next to her," Mom called out. "Let's get both of you in the photo." I walked forward, my sandals tapping against the wood with a steady rhythm. Aria glanced over her shoulder, her grin stretched too wide. "Come on, sis." "Big smile," she chirped. I stood beside her, shoulders squared. The camera lens reflected the afternoon sun, a blinding pinpoint aimed right at us. "Say cheese," someone shouted. The shutter clicked. I didn't smile. After the photo, everyone dispersed into little groups, some heading to the kitchen for cake, others lingering on the dock. Aria stayed outside, talking loudly about renovation plans and how this place will finally be put to good use. I leaned against the railing, watching the sunlight slide across the water. My hands rested on the wood, tracing the grooves Dad and I sanded down all those summers ago. It felt almost alive beneath my fingers, as if it remembered who had built it. Behind me, I heard Aria's voice carrying through the air. I might tear down that old shed. It's useless anyway. The shed where Dad kept every tool. The shed where he taught me how to measure twice and cut once. I exhaled slowly, steadying the tremor in my hands. Inside the house, laughter bubbled. The TV in the living room played a game show faintly in the background. Plates clinked in the kitchen. Aria floated through the rooms like she already owned every inch, pointing at walls and corners, talking about changes. I followed at a distance, pretending to refill my drink. I noticed the casual way she placed her handbag on the kitchen counter, right where Dad used to set the coffee pot each morning. He turned to me suddenly. "You're being quiet. Are you okay with all this?" I held her gaze. "Of course," I said softly. "Why wouldn't I be?" She laughed, almost relieved. "Good. I didn't want this to be weird between us." "Weird." He called it weird. Mom came in carrying a folder. The same renovation folder I'd seen earlier. "We should probably get these old papers out of the way," she said, handing it to Aria like it was a bundle of napkins. Aria didn't even look at it. She tucked it under her arm and kept talking about painting the walls. I took a sip of my tea, hiding the small, involuntary smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. They had just handed over everything they didn't understand. The sun dipped lower, staining the sky with warm streaks of orange and pink. Guests began to leave, waving goodbyes. Cars crunched down the gravel driveway one by one. I stayed back, helping Mom clear the dishes. She was humming, content, as if she had just solved a big family problem. "She's so excited," she said. "This place has always been her dream." Her dream. The words landed like stones. I stacked the plates carefully, each one sliding into place with a soft clink. "I'm sure she'll make something out of it," I replied. Mom didn't notice the edge in my voice. He never did. Later, as Aria prepared to leave, she came over and hugged me, her perfume too sweet and too strong. "I really want you to visit," she said brightly. "I'll make sure you always have a room here. It'll be like old times." Old times? The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. "I'll keep that in mind," I said, pulling back just enough to look her in the eye. For a second her smile faltered, just a flicker, but it was there. As the last car disappeared down the road, the house grew quiet. The only sounds were the cicadas in the trees and the faint creak of the dock shifting in the breeze. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, staring out at the water. The night air was cooler now, carrying the smell of pine and damp earth. I walked down to the dock alone, the wooden boards groaning softly beneath my feet. At the end, I looked back at the house. My house, though no one else seemed to remember it that way. I slipped my hand into my pocket and felt the smooth edge of a folded envelope. Inside were copies of every renovation receipt, contract, and permit. I'd kept them for years, not out of spite but out of habit. My father had taught me to keep records. Now they were more than memories. They were leverage. The lake was still. My reflection stared back at me, older, steadier, not broken. "They think they've decided," I whispered to the water. But they hadn't decided anything. Not yet. And certainly not without me. The lake was still that night. The moonlight stretched across the water like a silk ribbon. I stood on the dock with my arms folded, staring at the house that was no longer mine, at least not in their eyes. My breath floated in the cool air. The boards beneath my feet creaked softly, like they remembered the weight of my childhood. They thought the story ended here. I knew it had just begun. The next morning, the smell of overripe peaches greeted me when I opened the kitchen window. I'd always loved that smell. Sweet but slightly sharp, like summer refusing to let go. Birds chirped somewhere beyond the trees. A delivery van pulled into the gravel driveway, tires crunching. Aria stepped out of her shiny SUV wearing oversized sunglasses and a wide grin. She waved to the delivery man like a movie star greeting fans. I watched from inside as they hauled paint cans, furniture boxes, and something that looked suspiciously like a small marble fountain. She was turning the lake house into her playground. "Big day," she chirped when she saw me by the doorway. "I'm starting renovations. You're welcome to stay, of course, but it's going to get a little messy." I nodded slowly, my hands resting on the doorframe. "I don't mind mess," I said. She laughed, already distracted by her decorator on the phone. Mess didn't scare me. Carelessness did. And she was dripping with it. I slipped into the study once the noise shifted to the backyard. Dad's old oak desk still stood in the corner, solid and scratched, holding decades of household history. I opened the top drawer, the one everyone else ignored because it stuck halfway. It groaned when I pulled. Inside, perfectly stacked, were folders. Insurance papers. Property tax receipts. Building permits. All yellowing at the edges but meticulously arranged. I remembered filing some of these myself after helping Dad reseal the dock. My hands brushed across the familiar envelopes, and for a brief second, I felt him beside me, steady, methodical, patient. I pulled out a thick folder labeled 2011 to 2019 Dock and Structure Improvements. Inside were receipts, official county permits, inspection sign-offs, even handwritten notes from the inspector. My handwriting was on half of them. No one had touched this drawer in years. Aria certainly hadn't. She thought ownership started with a gift speech and a party. She didn't understand that houses have paper trails, and those trails can turn into traps if someone's not paying attention. Around noon she invited a few friends over. I listened from the hallway as they giggled about how quaint the place was and how they were going to modernize everything. One of them asked, "Do you even have permits for this kind of renovation?" Aria waved her hand. "Oh, it's family property. It's fine. Nobody checks these things." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. They would check. Eventually. After lunch I drove into town. The county office sat between a laundromat and a thrift store, its paint peeling, the air inside smelling faintly of coffee and old paper. I knew the woman at the front desk, Sandra. We'd gone to high school together. She recognized me immediately. "Well, if it isn't the Lake girl," she said, leaning on the counter. "Haven't seen you in ages. What brings you in?" I lowered my voice. "I need copies of the latest property tax statements for the lake house. And if possible, the current status on any outstanding permits." She raised an eyebrow. "Aria's place now, huh?" My stomach tightened. "So they say." Sandra tapped at her computer. "Looks like taxes haven't been fully updated since your dad passed. There's a backlog. And, interesting." She squinted at the screen. "No renovation permits have been pulled for this year. If she starts construction without those, that's gonna be a problem." I kept my expression neutral, though a spark flickered inside me. "Good to know," I said. Sandra slid a stack of printouts across the counter. "Take these. I'll let you know if anything else flags." Back at the house, Aria was giving orders to a group of workers she'd hired through some online service. She pointed at the walls and barked out instructions, waving her arms like a director on set. One of the men, older and experienced, caught my eye as I passed by. "She doesn't have permits for this kind of job," he muttered under his breath. "But she's paying by the hour. Not my circus." "Not yet," I murmured. I slipped into the kitchen, set my bag on the counter, and quietly sorted the documents I'd gathered. Tax statements, unpaid balances, outdated insurance policies. Each piece formed part of a puzzle Aria didn't even know existed. The next day brought rain. Thin sheets of it fell across the lake, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. Aria didn't slow down. She ordered deliveries, met with contractors, and posted cheerful updates on social media about her dream lake retreat coming to life. I brewed coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen, and sat at the table reviewing the insurance policy I'd found. It expired last year. No one had renewed it. Which meant legally, if anything happened to the property during her renovations, she'd be on the hook. Completely. She walked in mid-call, umbrella dripping. "You're up early," she said distractedly. "Old habits," I replied, folding the papers before she could see. "Do me a favor. If the inspector comes by, tell him I'm not here yet," she said, already running upstairs. "Inspector. He knew someone might check." She just didn't care. That afternoon I placed a quiet phone call. Not to an inspector. To the tax office. I asked about penalties for unpaid property taxes. The clerk explained, once a property changes hands or significant modifications are made without proper updates, the previous assessment no longer applies. Penalties can accrue fast, especially if the new owner doesn't officially register. I thanked him, hung up, and looked out the window where Aria stood under the rain, excitedly explaining her vision to her decorator. She was laying the foundation of her empire on sand. In the evenings when everyone was gone and the house was quiet, I would sit in the study with a small lamp glowing, sorting through more folders. I found a renovation contract between my father and the county, signed by both of us, detailing dock repairs and joint ownership clauses for improvements. I'd forgotten about that clause. It stated that any structure built jointly between him and another legal adult would carry shared equity value, even if the deed transferred later. My name was on it. I ran my finger slowly under the line with my signature. It had been years since I'd signed that, but the ink hadn't faded. Neither had my rights. I slipped the document into a separate folder and tucked it into my tote bag. This wasn't about nostalgia anymore. It was about strategy. One evening, Aria hosted a preview party. She invited friends, neighbors, even a few county board members she barely knew. String lights wrapped around the trees, music played softly, and her voice floated through the crowd like a hostess at a summer gala. I mingled quietly, listening. She bragged about upcoming renovations, talking about expanding the deck and adding a boathouse. A man from the county planning department raised an eyebrow. "You got approvals for all that?" She laughed lightly. "Oh, it's family property. We don't need all that formal stuff. Everyone knows us." I watched his face tighten just slightly. He didn't correct her. Not there, not publicly, but I saw the seed of doubt plant itself. The rain returned that night, heavier this time. Guests hurried to their cars with umbrellas, the gravel driveway turning to mud. Aria stayed behind, tipsy on white wine and compliments. She sat on the porch swaying, humming some song from her college days. I joined her, wrapping a shawl around my shoulders. "This is going to be amazing," she said, eyes half closed. "Finally, something that's truly mine." My fingers curled against the fabric of my shawl. "You should make sure all the paperwork's in order," I said softly. He waved me off. "Details. I have bigger plans." She had no idea how those details could drown her. Over the next few weeks, I became a quiet observer with sharp eyes. I took photos of deliveries, logged contractor visits, kept copies of every public notice pinned to the gate. Aria's spending grew reckless. She ignored letters from the tax office, assuming they were routine. One morning, I watched her crumple a notice and toss it in the trash without opening it. I waited until she left, pulled it out, smoothed it, and read every line. The words "delinquent tax warning" stared back at me in bold red. I folded it carefully and slid it into my growing evidence folder. By late September, Aria's renovations were in full swing, but the paperwork behind them was unraveling like a loose thread she refused to see. Every skipped permit, every unpaid fee, every neglected insurance renewal was stacking quietly in the background, waiting to fall like a tower of cards. And I was the one keeping count. She celebrated her new life at the lake. I was already building the case that would end it. That night, I sat at the kitchen table alone, the overhead light humming softly above me. The house was quiet except for the occasional groan of the old wooden beams settling. I spread the documents across the table like a deck of cards. Tax warnings, outdated insurance, permit records, the renovation contract with my name in neat blue ink. Each paper was a thread. Together they formed a net. I didn't need to fight her publicly. I just needed to pull each thread slowly until she walked right into it herself. The next morning, the sky was gray and heavy. Rain had soaked the gravel driveway overnight, leaving puddles that reflected the bare trees. A postal worker knocked on the door holding a bundle of envelopes with rubber bands. I signed for them and flipped through bills, catalogs, and, tucked in the middle, a property tax notice stamped in red. It wasn't addressed to me, but I opened it anyway. Aria's name was there. The amount due was higher than I'd expected, with penalties already accumulating. She had no idea. I slipped the notice into my folder and made a copy on the dusty old printer in the study. The machine rattled and wheezed like it hadn't been used in years, but it worked. Later that day, I drove back to the county office. Sandra was there again, sipping coffee behind the counter. She raised an eyebrow when she saw me with a manila folder tucked under my arm. "Back so soon," she said. I lowered my voice. "Do me a favor. Can you check if any inspection requests have been filed for the lake house lately?" Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Nothing. And with those kinds of renovations, that's risky. If an inspector drops by unannounced and finds unpermitted structural work, The fines can pile up fast. I leaned in slightly. And if taxes are behind too? She gave a low whistle. Then she's in trouble. Could you let me know if anything flags in the system? Sandra nodded slowly. I can't give you confidential updates, but I can keep an eye out. Thank you, I said. I meant it. The days blurred into a quiet rhythm. Aria continued her noisy renovations, posting daily updates online like some lifestyle influencer. Lake Dream Makeover. Day 12. She captioned one video, twirling in the kitchen as workers hammered away behind her. I continued my quiet work. Each morning I collected mail. Each afternoon I filed something new away. Late evenings were my favorite, when she'd finally leave for the city and the house would fall silent again. That's when I'd pull everything out on the table and build my case like a puzzle. I wasn't rushing. Rushing is how mistakes happen. I was patient. Surgical. One Tuesday morning a neighbor knocked on my door, Mr. Collins from 2 houses down. He wore his usual faded cap and smelled faintly of sawdust. You got a minute? He asked. Of course, I replied, stepping onto the porch. He lowered his voice. I heard your sister's planning to sell part of the dock to some boating club. She's been asking around about buyers. I blinked. Sell the dock? He nodded. She told my nephew she's looking to get some quick cash for her renovations. Thought you should know. My pulse tightened. That dock wasn't just wood. It was built under a joint renovation agreement with Dad, an agreement with my signature on it. She couldn't sell it without my consent. I thanked him and went straight to the study. My hands shook a little as I flipped through the folders until I found it. The dock contract signed by both me and my father, with a clause clearly stating that no structural changes or sales could be made without mutual approval. She had no idea she was about to walk into a wall. That afternoon I found her in the kitchen with her decorator, flipping through catalogs. Aria, I said calmly. I heard you're planning to sell part of the dock? She looked up, caught off guard. Oh, yeah, maybe. Why? You can't. She laughed lightly, assuming I was joking. Why not? It's mine now. I set the folder on the counter and slid it toward her. She frowned and flipped it open, scanning the contract. I signed this with Dad, I said softly. Any changes to the dock require both our approval. It's legally binding. Her jaw tightened. This is ridiculous. It's in writing, I said. You should keep track of these things. I turned and left before she could respond. My heart was steady. One more thread tightened. The following week, a small white envelope arrived from the county tax office. Inside was a notice of delinquency escalation. The unpaid amount had grown and a deadline was listed in bold letters. I made 3 copies. One for my records, one tucked discreetly into Aria's pile of unopened mail, and one in a separate folder marked critical. That same evening I called the county's automated line to verify the property's tax status. When the robotic voice listed the overdue balance and potential consequences, I closed my eyes and listened carefully, committing every word to memory. Meanwhile, Aria's renovation chaos continued. Trucks arrived daily, unloading lumber, tiles, and furniture. The lawn was torn up, the porch half-painted, the air constantly buzzing with drills and saws. She strutted around in designer boots, barking orders like she was running a production set. I watched quietly, making notes. Her carelessness was becoming documented evidence. One Friday afternoon an inspector finally showed up. A gray sedan pulled into the driveway and a man in a windbreaker stepped out, clipboard in hand. Aria was away, so I answered the door. Good afternoon, ma'am, he said. Routine inspection. We received anonymous reports of unpermitted work at this address. Anonymous. I kept my face neutral. Of course, come in. He walked through the house, taking photos, jotting notes. The unfinished deck expansion caught his attention. This should have been approved weeks ago, he muttered. After half an hour he handed me a pink slip. Notice of violation. The owner will need to address this within 30 days or face escalating fines. I'll make sure she gets it, I said, slipping it into my folder the moment he left. When Aria returned that evening, flushed from a day in the city, I watched her pick up the notice from the counter. Her smile faltered. What is this? She snapped. An inspector came by, I said simply. Did you call them? I raised an eyebrow. I didn't need to. She tossed the notice onto the table, muttering, "They'll figure it out. It's just paperwork." She had no idea paperwork was exactly what would bring her down. By late October, the penalties, warnings, and unpaid taxes were piling up like autumn leaves against the house. Aria was so busy decorating and planning events that she barely noticed the quiet stack of legal issues growing taller by the day. "I noticed everything." Sandra called one afternoon. "Hey," she said in a low tone, "the property just got flagged for a pre-auction review. If the taxes aren't paid by the deadline, it'll move to the next stage." My fingers tightened around the phone. "Thank you," I whispered. She hesitated. "You're not, trying to—" "I'm just making sure things are handled properly," I said. And that was the truth. Properly and precisely. I spent that evening walking the dock. The air was crisp, the lake black under the starlight. Each step on the wood echoed softly like a quiet drumbeat. I thought of Dad, of the summers we'd spent working side by side. He thought she was untouchable. He thought a gift was the same as ownership. But houses remember who built them even if people forget. Every paper filed, every notice copied, every quiet conversation, it all tightened the noose around her, thread by thread. She hadn't felt it yet. But I had. The air was changing. The house itself seemed to sense it. And soon she would too. The morning of the auction was cold and sharp. October had peeled away the last bits of summer warmth, leaving the air brittle. I stood by the kitchen window at 6:42 a.m., hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. Mist curled low over the lake, turning everything outside into a soft gray watercolor. The dock stretched out into the fog like a quiet accomplice. I'd barely slept. Not from nerves, but from the thrumming awareness that everything I had quietly built, every copied notice, every clause, every unanswered envelope, was now converging into a single day. On the counter beside me sat a leather folder. Inside, tax records, the dock contract, inspection violations, a notarized statement. Everything was arranged neatly in the order I might need it. My father's old fountain pen was tucked in the side pocket. It felt symbolic somehow. Today wasn't about vengeance. Not entirely. It was about balance. At 8:17 a.m. a car door slammed outside. I peeked through the curtain and saw Aria step out of her SUV, wearing a beige coat that cinched dramatically at the waist, her hair perfectly blown out. She looked like someone arriving for a photo shoot, not someone standing on the edge of losing everything. She didn't knock. She just walked in like she owned the place, which for the moment she technically did. "Morning," she said brightly, setting her designer tote on the counter. "Big day today." I raised an eyebrow. "You know about it?" She laughed lightly, but there was a tremor underneath. "The letter showed up yesterday. Some nonsense about delinquent taxes and public auction. I already called a lawyer. They said it's probably a clerical error. I'll clear it up in person." She poured herself coffee like nothing was wrong. I watched her for a moment. Her confidence was almost impressive. She'd spent months ignoring every warning, and now she truly believed she could charm her way out at the 11th hour. "Are you going into town?" I asked. "Of course. I want to make sure nobody tries anything funny." She flashed a smile, but her eyes were tight. "I'll see you there," I said quietly. The courthouse sat on Main Street, squeezed between a hardware store and a small diner. Its red brick facade had been there since before I was born. I'd been in that building dozens of times over the years, for permits, paperwork, and once for jury duty. But that day, as I walked up the stone steps with my folder clutched to my chest, it felt different. The crisp wind tugged at my coat. The smell of roasted coffee drifted from the diner across the street. I could hear the sound of Aria's heels clicking behind me, sharp and impatient. She was on the phone, saying words like ridiculous and won't take long. Inside, the auction room was small, with rows of metal chairs and a wooden podium at the front. A clerk sat behind a folding table sorting papers. A few local buyers, contractors, small-time investors, retirees, murmured to each other. Aria hesitated at the doorway when she saw the crowd. "This many people? For what?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I just found a seat in the second row and placed my folder on my lap. She sat 2 rows behind me. I could feel her eyes on the back of my head. At 9 o'clock sharp, the clerk stepped to the podium and cleared his throat. "We'll begin with property number 47, lakefront parcel on Willow Bend Road." Whispers rippled through the room. Everyone knew the house. It wasn't just property, it was a local landmark. The clerk continued. This property has entered delinquency status due to unpaid taxes, inspection violations and failure to respond to multiple notices. Minimum bid is set at outstanding balance plus fees. I heard Aria shift in her seat. Her lawyer, a young man who looked barely old enough to rent a car, leaned over and whispered something to her. She nodded, jaw tight. The clerk explained the rules. Cashier's checks only. Proof of funds required. Once bidding began, it would move quickly. When he asked if there were any questions, Aria raised her hand. This is obviously a mistake, she said loudly, her voice cutting through the room. The property was gifted to me by my parents. We're handling the taxes. This whole thing shouldn't be happening. The clerk blinked at her, used to these kinds of speeches. Ma'am, the property status speaks for itself. Unless the balance is paid in full before bidding begins, the auction proceeds. She glanced at her lawyer. He whispered again. She folded her arms and sat back, huffing. I kept my gaze forward, hands folded calmly on my folder. The bidding started low, just the amount of the overdue taxes plus fees. A man in a plaid jacket raised his paddle. Another bidder followed. I raised mine next, my voice steady as I gave my number. Aria whipped her head toward me. You're bidding, she hissed. I turned slightly, meeting her eyes. It's a public auction, I said softly. Color rose to her cheeks. You wouldn't. But I already had. The bids ticked upward, but not much. Most of the crowd were casual bidders, hoping for a cheap lake property. They didn't know the house like I did. They didn't know its quirks. The aging plumbing, the uneven foundation near the kitchen wall, the expensive upkeep of the dock. They backed off quickly. Within minutes, the auction narrowed down to me and a man I recognized. A contractor who'd flipped a few properties nearby. He studied me curiously, clearly surprised I was still in the game. He raised the bid once more. I countered without hesitation. My voice didn't shake. He paused, scratching his chin. Then he shook his head and lowered his paddle. All right, the clerk said. Final call. Silence. Sold. The gavel hit the podium with a sharp crack. For a heartbeat, everything went quiet in my head. No chatter, no footsteps, just that sound. Then the room rustled back to life. Papers shuffled, people stood, someone coughed. I walked to the front, folder in hand, and signed the paperwork. My father's fountain pen glided across the page smoothly. The clerk nodded, handing me the stamped receipt. Behind me, I heard Aria's chair scrape against the floor as she stood abruptly. This isn't over, she said, voice shaking. You can't just. The clerk cut her off gently but firmly. Ma'am, the auction is complete. The deed will be processed once payment clears. You're welcome to speak with the county office if you have questions. Her lawyer tried to calm her, but she pulled her arm away, glaring at me. Outside, the sky had cleared. The wind was still crisp, but sunlight was breaking through the clouds in narrow beams, lighting up patches of Main Street. Aria followed me out, her heels clacking furiously. You think you're clever, she spat. You've been waiting for this, haven't you? Sitting there like some kind of snake. I turned to face her. For the first time, I didn't soften my voice. I didn't make you ignore the letters. I didn't make you skip the permits. You did that all by yourself. Her jaw worked, but no words came. I walked toward my car slowly, each step measured. Behind me, she shouted something I didn't catch. I didn't need to. The house was mine again. Not by inheritance. Not by sentiment. By strategy. On the drive back to the lake, I kept the windows slightly cracked, letting the cold air bite my cheeks. I passed the diner, the hardware store, the familiar winding roads lined with red and gold leaves. Everything looked the same, but it felt different. Sharper, more defined, like I was seeing it through clean glass for the first time. When I pulled into the driveway, the house sat quiet under the afternoon sun. The lawn was still torn up, the renovations half finished. A forgotten paint bucket sat near the porch steps. It wasn't pretty, not yet. But it was mine. I placed the auction papers on the kitchen table, right where I'd once laid out the warnings. My father's pen rested on top, gleaming faintly in the sunlight. For months, I'd operated in shadows, quiet, patient, precise. Today I'd stepped fully into the light. But even as the house fell silent around me, I knew Aria wasn't done. The fury in her eyes as the gavel fell. That wasn't the end of her fight. It was the beginning of something else. And I was ready. That night I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I sat in the living room with a single lamp glowing, casting long shadows against the half-painted walls Aria had abandoned mid-project. The auction papers were still on the table, neatly stacked, with my father's fountain pen resting on top like a signature from the past. The house was silent. But not the kind of silence that comes from emptiness. It was the deep, settling quiet of a place that knows the fight is over. Outside, the wind off the lake rattled the porch swing. A few leftover renovation tools clinked against the side of the house. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and let the weight of the day sink in. Months of quiet calculation had led here. Every document I'd copied, every clause I'd dug up, every ignored letter I'd tucked away, it had all come together. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The house itself felt like it was exhaling with me. The headlights reached the window just after midnight. I heard the crunch of gravel, the slam of a car door, and then the hurried click of heels. Aria. I stayed seated as she stormed through the door, cheeks flushed, hair frizzing in the night air. She wasn't wearing her polished smile anymore, just raw fury. "You think this is over?" she hissed, standing in the doorway, dripping anger like rain. I looked at her calmly. "It already is." She marched toward the table, snatched the auction receipt and waved it at me. "You stole it. You waited like some vulture until I made one mistake." "One mistake," I said softly, standing. "You ignored every notice. Every warning. You treated this house like a prop. That wasn't one mistake, Aria. That was a choice. Over and over again." Her eyes burned. "You were supposed to be on my side. We're family." I took a slow step toward her. "Family doesn't mean watching you burn down everything Dad built and smiling while you do it." She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "Do you remember the summer Dad hurt his back?" She blinked, thrown by the sudden shift. "I was 13, I continued. "He couldn't finish the dock. So I did. Every plank. Every nail. My hands bled and he stood beside me with a brace on, teaching me how to seal it right. That dock isn't just wood. It's my childhood. It's everything we worked for. And you wanted to paint it white for Instagram." Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. I picked up the folder from the table and opened it slowly, letting the papers fan out like a deck of cards. "This," I said, "is what ownership looks like. Not a speech at a party. Not a photo shoot. Responsibility. Paperwork. Choices." I slid the folder across the table toward her. She looked down at it but didn't touch it. "This is yours," I said. "Every unpaid bill. Every violation. Every penalty. All with your name on it." Her hands trembled as she finally picked up one page. "They'll come after me for this," she whispered. I nodded. "They already are." She sank into the chair, the fight slowly draining from her face. It was the first time I'd seen her look small. The next morning the lake was still. The fog had burned away, revealing clear, sharp water that mirrored the blue sky. I stood on the dock in my slippers, a cup of coffee warming my hands. For the first time in years the view felt undisturbed. No construction noise, no decorators shouting, no Aria's voice echoing down the hall. I heard the sound of tires on gravel and turned. Aria's SUV pulled into the driveway. She stepped out, not in her usual polished outfits but in jeans and a sweater. Her hair was tied back messily. No lawyer this time. No entourage. She walked down toward the dock, each step slower than the last. I didn't move. When she reached me, she stopped a few feet away. "They gave me 30 days to clear everything," she said flatly. "Or it goes on my record." I nodded once. "I know." She stared at the water for a long moment. "You planned this, didn't you?" I didn't lie. "I prepared for it. There's a difference." She laughed bitterly. "You're colder than I thought." "I learned from watching you," I said quietly. We stood there, the lake lapping softly against the dock. For a moment, it almost felt like we were kids again, staring out at the water after a long swim. But the weight between us now was heavier than wet towels and summer chores. He finally turned to me. "What happens now?" "You leave," I said simply. "This house isn't yours anymore." It never really was. Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. She nodded slowly, almost mechanically, then turned and walked back toward the house. The weeks that followed were oddly peaceful. Aria tried briefly to rally our parents, But they'd already drained their savings helping her with other messes, and this time they couldn't save her. Her lawyer sent a few letters, but the county's records were clear. The auction was final. Contractors stopped showing up. Trucks stopped rolling in. The half-finished renovations stood frozen, like a set after the play has ended. I began restoring the house, not with flashy updates but with quiet repairs. I hired a local handyman to fix the porch steps, sanded the edges of the dock myself, and repainted the kitchen cabinets in soft cream. The air inside started to smell like lemon polish again, not sawdust and chaos. Each nail I tapped into place felt like stitching a wound closed. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the auction, I was upstairs cleaning the loft when I heard a car outside. I peeked through the window and saw Aria standing by the dock. No coat this time, no coffee cup. Just her staring out at the water. I went downstairs and stepped outside. She didn't turn when she heard me. Her voice floated back, quiet and tired. "I never thought you'd actually go through with it." I stood beside her, leaving a careful gap between us. "I didn't think you'd make it this easy." She let out a soft, bitter laugh. "You always were the responsible one. I just didn't think you'd weaponize it." I shrugged lightly. "You took my memories. I took your future. Seems fair." Her eyes snapped to mine. For a second I saw the old sibling fire flare up. But then it faded. She lowered her gaze. "I don't hate you," she said finally. "I don't believe you," I replied. She nodded slowly, accepting it. Then she left. No yelling. No dramatic exit. Just quiet footsteps on the dock, fading into the distance. The day she moved her last box out, I stood on the porch and watched her SUV disappear down the road. A soft wind lifted the edges of my shawl. The house behind me was still waiting. I walked down to the dock alone. The sunset spread across the lake in shades of gold and rose. The water was calm. The boards beneath my feet felt solid again. I closed my eyes and let the silence wrap around me. Not the uneasy silence of plotting, but the deep, steady kind that follows resolution. For the first time in years I wasn't holding back, waiting or calculating. The fight was finished. I whispered into the wind, "It's done." That night I tucked the folder of old papers into a cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Not out of necessity anymore, but as a reminder. Quiet power doesn't need applause. It just needs patience. The house was mine again. Not because someone handed it to me, but because I took it back piece by piece without raising my voice. In the following months, the lake house slowly returned to its original rhythm. Morning fog, creaking floors, the smell of coffee at dawn. Neighbors stopped by to chat like they used to. Mrs. Jenkins brought over pie one Sunday and said, "It's good to see the house back where it belongs." I didn't disagree. Sometimes, when the moon is high and the lake is still, I walk out to the edge of the dock with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. I can almost hear Dad's voice in the wind, calm and steady. "You did good," I imagine him saying. And for once I believe it. The house, the dock, the memories, they were mine again. Not because I begged for them, but as I took them back with quiet, relentless precision. Aria took my past for granted. I took her future in return. And that is a balance I can live with.